In the winter of 1941, Soviet engineers briefly flirted with a truly bizarre idea. What if there was a light tank that didn't use tracks at all? What if instead it skimmed across snow and ice on skis, driven by an aircraft engine and pushed forward by a massive propeller? The idea stemmed from hard-earned lessons during the Winter War, where conventional vehicles proved slow and unreliable in deep snow and bitter cold. Soviet planners wanted something faster and more mobile in a tank, but far better protected and more heavily armed than the lightly built Aerosani, normally used for transport and reconnaissance. To achieve that, they came up with a design simply known as the 02SS, which combined a fully armored hull and tank turret taken from the T-40 amphibious light tank, theoretically armed with a 23mm autocannon. Designed in Leningrad by the NKVD Bureau and built at NKVD Factory No. 5, it was an ambitious attempt to create a self-contained, heavily armed patrol vehicle for frozen terrain. In practice, however, the idea ran into some serious problems. The vehicle was heavy, difficult to control, and expensive, and trials in early 1941 quickly exposed serious flaws in its inherently contradictory design. The project was thus quietly abandoned before it ever reached service, but not before leaving behind one of the strangest and most fascinating dead ends in pre-war Soviet armored vehicle development. Aerosani is a Russian word that refers to a whole class of propeller-driven snow vehicles developed and widely used in the Soviet Union. In English sources, you'll often see the Russian word kept as is, although translations like aerosled or aerosledge also sometimes appear. The singular form Aerosan doesn't really exist in the original language, so for the sake of accuracy, we'll stick with Aerosani when talking about both the vehicle type and this specific prototype. The name of the prototype itself also isn't well established. In internal documents from 1940, it was simply known by its project index, 02SS. The Soviet armored forces, meanwhile, referred to it more descriptively as the NKVD Armored Aerosani, named after the design bureau that created it. Other documents use the name Armored Aerosani Tunguska type, named after the traditional Siberian Tunguska dog sled. In modern historical writing, you'll also see it nicknamed sometimes the Tunguska tank. To keep things simple and consistent, we'll be using the original designation. Interest in propeller-driven snow vehicles started appearing in Europe in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. However, it was Russia, and later the Soviet Union, where such machines proved most useful in practice and saw their widest adoption. The immense size of the country, sparse and poorly developed road infrastructure, and long severe winters created ideal conditions for a vehicle capable of rapid movement over snow and ice without reliance on wheels or prepared roads. The first experiments with Aerosani began with the First World War, and were closely linked to early aviation research and the development of lightweight internal combustion engines. Pioneers of Russian aviation and engineering explored mounting those engines and propellers on wooden sled frames, creating vehicles capable of relatively high speeds on frozen surfaces. These early Aerosani were simple in construction, typically consisting of a lightweight hull mounted on skis, steered either by the skis themselves or by rudders placed behind the propeller. During the First World War, Aerosani remained largely experimental, but the conflict accelerated their development. The Russian Empire faced chronic logistical difficulties in snowbound regions, prompting trials of Aerosani for courier duties, reconnaissance, and the transport of personnel or light cargo. Although production remained limited and designs were far from standardized, wartime experience demonstrated that propeller-driven sleds could outperform horse-drawn sleighs and wheeled vehicles under certain winter conditions. The collapse of the Russian Empire and the outbreak of the Russian Civil War further shaped the early development of such vehicles. Both red and white forces operated across vast territories with minimal infrastructure, often in extreme winter climates. Improvised Aerosani, assembled from civilian components and fitted with whatever engines were available, were thus often employed as supply vehicles and for communication and patrol across frozen rivers and open snowfields. By the end of the Civil War, Aerosani had demonstrated their basic value as winter vehicles, laying the groundwork for more systematic development and broader adoption in the newly established Soviet Union. During the interwar period, the new Soviet state, eager to modernize its armed forces, actively encouraged and funded the development of Aerosani. Dozens of increasingly refined designs entered limited service, including the advanced all-metal ANT-4 Aerosani developed under Andrei Tupolev, as well as the more utilitarian automobile-like NKL-6 designed by Nikolai Andreev. These vehicles were widely employed during the Winter War, a conflict in which many aspects of Soviet planning and execution proved deeply flawed. Aerosani, however, stood out as one of the few systems that actually worked in the harsh Finnish winter, traversing deep snow, frozen lakes, and forest tracks with relative ease. In practice, they were used primarily in auxiliary roles, serving as supply vehicles and as transports for evacuating the wounded. But they also proved useful for artillery fire correction and patrol duties in more open areas of the front. Combat experience soon led to the mounting of machine guns on many Aerosani, but their lack of armor still left crews exposed to small arms fire. This limitation restricted their effectiveness in direct combat and made patrol missions inherently risky. Despite these shortcomings, the overall performance of Aerosani during the Winter War left a strong impression on Soviet planners. After the conflict, the Soviet High Command chose to continue and expand their development, ordering a new generation of military Aerosani. Among these were the light RF-8, produced by Gorky Automobile Factory under the designation GAZ-98, and the larger NKL-26, which became the first mass-produced Aerosani fitted with frontal armor up to 10 mm thick. More than 2,000 examples of the former and about 1,500 of the latter were manufactured, and both types were employed extensively during the Second World War. While they continued to serve mainly in auxiliary roles, Aerosani were occasionally used during raids behind enemy lines, often in cooperation with ski infantry. Even so, one key requirement remained unfulfilled: the development of a heavy, fully armored patrol Aerosani capable of carrying a comparatively high-caliber weapon while retaining adequate mobility in deep snow. Following the Winter War and subsequent expansion of Aerosani use, the Soviet High Command identified a capability gap between lightly armed utility Aerosani and conventional tracked armored vehicles. In late 1940, the Council of People's Commissars of the Soviet Union issued a requirement for a heavy patrol Aerosani capable of operating independently in snow-covered terrain, while offering protection against small arms fire and carrying significantly heavier armament than existing designs. The specified combat weight was 3.5 tons. The project was assigned to Encyclopedia 50, a Leningrad-based design bureau whose prior experience lay primarily in naval and motorboat construction rather than armored land vehicles. During the design phase, the project received the internal index 02SS. Construction of the prototype was entrusted to NKVD Factory No. 5. As development progressed, the projected weight increased, as it always does, from 3.5 to 4.7 tons. The crew was reduced from 3 to 2, and additional armor protection was added to the fuel tank. A full-scale wooden mock-up of the vehicle was completed, no joke, on Christmas Day 1940, and the prototype itself was finished and prepared for trials a month later. Unlike earlier Aerosani, which emphasized simplicity and low weight, the O2SS represented an ambitious attempt to integrate armor, a tank turret, and an aircraft-derived power plant into a single, highly specialized combat vehicle. Given how the project was run by the People's Commissariat of Shipbuilding, it is perhaps unsurprising that the O2SS followed a layout closer to that of a small armored boat mounted on skis than a traditional land vehicle. Its hull was based on the Tunguska-style two-ski dog sled, which was elongated and streamlined in order to reduce aerodynamic drag and improve stability at speed. The vehicle measured 7.7 meters in length and 1.9 meters in width, with skids 0.4 meters wide. The skis themselves were made of wood, with their lower surfaces clad in 2 mm thick stainless steel. The skids were connected by a welded frame constructed from thin aircraft pipes. The forward section of the Aerosani housed the fuel tanks and was mostly armored, although an unarmored plywood aerodynamic cap was fitted at the extreme front. This cap enclosed the batteries, unspecified instruments, and a toolbox. The central section contained the crew compartment, ammunition stowage, and turret, while the rear housed the engine and propeller assembly. Crew access was provided by side doors in the hull, and observation was accomplished through flush optical viewing ports. The commander, who was also the gunner, occupied the one-man turret equipped with 2 observation ports and a provision for a single TMFP optical sight. However, the prototype was never fitted with this sight, as it was never delivered. The driver was seated in a forward-projecting compartment with sloped sides, closely resembling the driver's position in the T-40 amphibious light tank. As on that vehicle, the driver was provided with 3 observation ports, along with a small hatch borrowed from the tank, which could be opened to improve visibility when not under threat. The driver controlled the vehicle using a steering wheel and brake levers. The whole frame had an arched cross-section, providing 400 mm of ground clearance. At the rear of the vehicle was a large armored engine compartment fitted with air intakes. The engine drove a 3-bladed propeller, which was surrounded by a protective frame intended to shield it from foliage and tree branches. Unlike mass-produced Aerosani, which typically relied on lightweight wooden construction, the O2SS employed a fully armored hull mounted on rigid skis. Steering was accomplished using a system derived from marine practice, consisting of 2 rudders, one positioned behind each skid. This unconventional arrangement reflected the naval background of the design bureau, but it would later prove problematic during trials. Mobility was the defining feature of the O2SS and the area in which the designers made the boldest choices. The vehicle was powered by an M103A V12 liquid-cooled aircraft piston engine, originally developed for use in medium bombers. Producing approximately 850 horsepower, this engine gave the Aerosani an exceptionally high theoretical power-to-weight ratio of roughly 150 horsepower per ton, exceeding that of all contemporary tanks. Power was transmitted directly to a large 3-bladed rear-mounted propeller, which provided thrust over snow and ice without reliance on tracks or wheels. Water and oil radiators were installed beneath the engine for cooling. A generator mounted to the engine charged batteries located in the front of the vehicle, which in turn powered onboard electrical systems, including the KR-STB radio, used for communication with other armored vehicles and higher echelons of command. In practice, however, this kind of system was never meant for something of this weight. Ground pressure was significantly higher than that of a standard Aerosani, causing the rear skis in particular to sink deeply into soft snow due to the vehicle's rearward center of mass. As a result, while the O2SS could achieve high speeds on flat, compacted surfaces like frozen lakes, its ability to climb slopes, traverse snowdrifts, or maneuver in forested terrain was severely limited. On prepared roads, steering was basically impossible. The turning radius was extremely large, especially on icy surfaces, and the absence of a reverse gear further complicated things. Armor protection was another key distinguishing feature of the O2SS when compared to earlier Aerosani designs. The hull was constructed from rolled armor plate bolted to an internal frame and was intended to protect the crew from rifle caliber fire and shell splinters. The frontal arc received the greatest level of protection, with all-around armor thickness of 7 mm, while the roof of the hull, turret, and engine compartment was 5 mm thick. Despite these measures, the level of protection ultimately proved insufficient to justify the added mass. It only improved survivability marginally, while dramatically increasing ground pressure and reducing mobility. Unlike later lightly armored Aerosani such as the NKL-26, which achieved a more effective balance between protection and weight, the O2SS suffered from a fundamental contradiction of attempting to combine comparatively heavy armor with a ski-based propulsion system. The O2SS was designed to carry significantly heavier armament than any previous Aerosani. Its most distinctive feature was the installation of a turret taken directly from the T-40, with an internal layout that remained largely unchanged. The intended main armament was the 23mm MP6 autocannon paired with a coaxial 7.62mm DT machine gun, giving the Aerosani firepower comparable to that of the T-40 equipped with the same weapon. In practice, however, series production of the T-40 with the MP6 never commenced, as the designer was shot before he was able to work out all the quirks, and nearly all tanks were instead armed with a 12.7mm Dushka heavy machine gun. Had the O2SS entered service, it would have likely received the same armament. The prototype itself was never fitted with a functional main weapon. Instead, it carried a worn-out, unserviceable cannon installed purely as a ballast, and no live-fire trials were ever conducted. Additional defensive provisions included 5 firing ports for personal weapons like the PPD submachine gun, along with stowage for 20 hand grenades. Ammunition carried for the PPD amounted to about 568 rounds. Because of the large engine housing located directly behind the turret, horizontal traverse of the main armament was limited to 280 degrees. The O2SS entered proving ground trials in early 1941, where its conceptual and practical shortcomings became apparent almost immediately. While the vehicle demonstrated high straight-line speed under favorable conditions, the overall results were deeply unsatisfactory. One of the most critical issues was the weight. A fully equipped vehicle weighed about 5.3 metric tons, significantly exceeding the already inflated figure of 4.7. This severely compromised mobility in deep snow, particularly given the rearward center of mass. Maneuverability was poor overall and especially problematic on icy surfaces where the turning radius could exceed 150 meters. The steering system proved ill-suited to uneven terrain, and vehicle control at low speeds was unreliable. Additional deficiencies further undermined the design. The O2SS lacked a reverse gear and an effective braking system, severely limiting its ability to maneuver in confined or forested terrain. Engine starting remained unreliable, and persistent cooling problems were reported, which was an inevitable consequence of adapting a powerful aircraft engine to prolonged low-speed operation in ground conditions. Although the O2SS demonstrated impressive speed on flat, compacted surfaces, these advantages were outweighed by its operational limitations. The Evaluation Commission concluded that the vehicle did not justify further development. Its cost was estimated at 300,000 rubles, which was more than twice as expensive as the T-40 light amphibious tank, and approached the price of a modern light tank while offering overall inferior combat capability. As a result, the project was terminated and no additional prototypes were constructed. With the cancellation of the O2SS, Soviet development efforts shifted towards simpler, lighter Aerosani designs that could be produced quickly and used effectively in auxiliary roles. The German invasion in June 1941 further reduced any appetite for experiments that required specialized engines and complex manufacturing processes. The O2SS remained a one-off prototype and was eventually scrapped, leaving behind only fragmentary documentation. Despite its failure, the O2SS remains a striking example of Soviet experimentation at the intersection of aviation, naval design, and armored warfare. It illustrates both the ambition of Soviet engineers in the pre-war period and the practical limits of combining heavy armament and armor with a vehicle fundamentally dependent on snow and ice for mobility. Nevertheless, the O2SS endures as an intriguing and little-known footnote in the broader history of Soviet armored vehicle development. We would like to thank Russian historian Yuri Pashalok for bringing this unusual vehicle to light, and historian Peter Samsonov for translating his work into English. This video article is largely on information uncovered by their work. As always, we invite you to subscribe to stay updated on future content. If you'd like to support the channel further, consider contributing via Patreon or PayPal. We'd like to give a special thanks to our medium and heavy tank tier Patreon supporters: Dave Shuford, Sopwith21, Dan Fitzpatrick, Owen M., and R. Robb. Your generous contributions help fund our research, illustrations, and video production. Until next time, keep us in your sights.